Hey everybody, this is the second video that I've done on jazz improvisation for anyone who's watching. And this one's going to start looking a little bit more at what we can do when we start to have some chord changes. Okay, so actually following what's going on in the chords rather than just playing like a blues scale or a pentatonic scale over the top of the entire progression. So in this one, we're going to look at some really basic ways to start to learn about the chords. Now, this isn't necessarily going to make the most exciting ways to create solos, but this is the really good way to start to train your ear and your fingers and everything like that to start to know where our chords are moving to and which ones kind of work together really well. Now, I've chosen the chord changes from Parker's Mood by Charlie Parker, because I know some of you are working on that. And it's basically just a level or two higher than a basic 12-bar blues. Okay, and I'm going to give you a few activities that you can do in your practice to start to work on some of these chord changes. Now, with this one, we're actually going to start practicing this one without the backing track. Because like I said, what we want to start to do is train our ear to know where those chords are going to. So it's really good to do that away from the backing track so that you're not relying on the other instruments in the backing track to tell you where the chords are going, so that your ear can start to anticipate where they are going. So I've done the chord changes up for alto saxophone. And there'll be, on the backing track, there's some chord changes if you need to transpose that into a concert pitch or into a B flat instrument if you're playing tenor saxophone. But let's have a look at some of the chords there. So you can see that I've got all the chords written out with the chord symbols just above them in MuseScore here. Now you can see mostly we've got chords changing every bar, and then sometimes 2 chords per bar, or we've got the same chord for an entire 2 bars. And then occasionally a bar and a half of one chord. But I've tried to make it very clear where the chords are and what notes are in them for alto saxophone. Now, if you're unsure how to form a chord from a chord symbol, then a quick Google search can help with that, or you can just contact me and I can help you with that, obviously. And if all of this looks far too complex for you, make sure that you're really comfortable using things like blues scales and pentatonic scales to solo before we move on to this slightly more advanced stuff with looking at the chord changes. Now, we can see that we've got a whole bunch of different notes there, but the way that I want you to practice this is actually just starting one note at a time, okay? So for each chord, we've got the 1, 3, 5, and 7 written underneath that chord. So you can see for G7, that's a G, B natural, D natural, and an F natural on the top there because it's a flattened 7th. Now, so the way I'm going to practice this, the first time through, and until I become really comfortable with the chords, I'm just going to play the tonic, so note number 1 of the chord. Okay, and you'll hear how I can move through those notes just as they change, whether it's two notes per bar or 1 note per bar. Now I'm going to put on a metronome for this. I've got mine set at 100, but you can obviously take it as slow as you need to make sure that you can start to keep up with those changes. So here's what that's going to sound like, just playing the tonic. And we'd be back to the start there. So once I become really comfortable with that, and by really comfortable means you know where that sound's going to be before you even start to play that note. Another really good way is actually being able to sing that tonic, so you really, really know where the chords are going. So even singing through those notes as well can be a really helpful way to start to recognize these chords. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the next note in the chord, which is the 3rd. So this means if I was playing 1 chord per bar, I'm still going to do them in crotchets, but I'll just hold the 2nd note a little bit longer before I change on to the next chord. So that'd sound like this. This is the 1st and the 3rd. with these chords, you can do them in whatever octave you like or whatever octave you feel comfortable, rather than always just jumping down to the lower note, for example, on a D7 chord or something like that. Okay, and so after this, I'm going to keep adding in notes. So the next time I'll do it, I'll add 1, 3, and the 5th, which would be the next note in the chord. And once I become really comfortable with those three, then I'm going to move on to 1, 3, 5, and the 7th of the chord. So I'll skip the 1, 3, 5 for the moment and just do the 1, 3, 5, 7, so you guys can hear how that would sound. And so you can hear I was doing those in quavers, even when it was 1 chord per bar, which isn't what I've got written there. I've got them written in crotchets, but I just prefer to play them that way. Okay, once you get comfortable with that, and so using those chordal notes in order, what you can start to do is start to play around with the order that you play them in. So instead of just going 1, 3, 5, 7 each time, you might do each chord going 1, 5, 3, 7, or 1, 7, 5, 3, or 1, 3, 7, 5, really any order. Normally keeping the 1 at the start, just while we're still learning to hear those chords, and just start to change them around a bit and see what kind of sounds you can get used to hearing. So for example, if I did 1, 5, 3, 7 for this chord change, it would sound like this. Made a bit of a mistake on the last one there. I just did 1, 3, 5, 7 instead of 1, 5. No, sorry, 1, 3, 5, 7, not 1, 5, 3, 7. Anyway, that's a lot of numbers. But basically any order that you can come up with just to start to play around with those chords. Now this isn't necessarily improvising over the chords, but it's a really good way to start to train yourself to what those chords have in them, but more importantly, what those sounds are, and starting to anticipate those notes when they're coming through. Then beyond this, once you've done that a few times and you can become really comfortable with it, that's when you can chuck on the backing track for Parker's Mood and start to use those chords, and either doing that exercise or just improvising freely using those chordal notes. Okay, that's it for this one. Hope that helped and has given you something to work on with your improvisation.